Lecture 37. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Virtual University's course on Business and Technical Communication. In today's lecture, we are going to continue our language review and continue looking at sentences. We are going to look at sentence problems which are caused due to lack of parallelism, problems because of choppy sentences. We are going to look at misplaced modifiers, how they can interrupt sentence structure. We're going to look at modifiers of nouns and adverb modifiers and see how we can use them effectively. We're also going to look at dangling modifiers. Another common error in sentences is the use of double negatives, and we're going to look at how we can improve that. We're also going to look at inappropriate shifts within sentences. These shifts could be in tense, mood, person or voice. We will learn about the correct use of sequence of tenses and pronoun reference. Pronoun reference problems could be caused because of unclear pronoun reference or broad pronoun reference, and we'll see what these two mean. And we will also look at pronoun case. Let's have a look first at problems in sentences which are caused because of lack of parallelism. What do we mean by parallelism? Parallelism refers to the principle that parts of a sentence that are the same in function should be the same in structure. Words or phrases joined by a coordinating conjunction should have the same form. Basically, this means that the sentences should be parallel in whatever clauses that they have. All the clauses, all the phrases in a sentence should be parallel if they are performing a parallel function. Let's have a look at a few examples. An unacceptable sentence would be an important consideration in orthopedic surgery and how to implant prosthesis is the possibility of infection. Now, in this example, as you see, there are two different phrases that are not parallel in structure. An important consideration in orthopedic surgery is one, the other is how to plant prosthesis is the other, and they are not in parallel structure. The improved version would be an important consideration in orthopedic surgery and prosthesis implants is the possibility of infection. Similarly, it would be unacceptable to say the comparison will cover possible mechanisms of change. This is a noun phrase. How the fissures widen because of regional tectonic stress. This is a noun clause. And are there changes in permeability from increased microcracking? This is a question. Now, when you're listing three different things, then again you will need to make sure that all the three different elements are parallel in structure. You cannot have one noun phrase, one as a noun clause and one as a question. Let's see how to improve this. It would be better to say the comparison will cover possible mechanisms of change, noun phrase हो गया. Fissure widening from regional tectonic stress, ये भी noun phrase हो गया. And permeability from increased microcracking, ये भी noun phrase हो गया. So now all three are have the same structure and they are performing the same function, as in they are part of a list. When you are attempting to write sentences that are parallel, make sure that all headings and subheadings are parallel with other headings and subheadings of the same level. Make sure all entries of the same level in an outline are parallel as well. Let's work on an example. It would be unacceptable to say 3 strategies for developing tooling systems for high-speed machining, and then the subheadings being how chemically stable materials are made, the other subheading being diffusion limited wear regimes. The first was a noun clause, second is a noun phrase, and the third heading being isolate the tool from the workplace, which is an imperative. अगर आप कह रहे हैं आपकी मेन हेडिंग है स्ट्रैटेजीज फॉर डेवलपिंग टूलिंग सिस्टम्स और फिर आप 3 डिफरेंट स्ट्रैटेजीज बता रहे हैं, तो आपकी तीनों डिफरेंट स्ट्रैटेजीज जो हैं वो डिफरेंट टाइप की नहीं हो सकती. यू कैन नॉट हैव वन स्ट्रैटेजी फ्रेज्ड एज अ नाउन क्लॉज, वन स्ट्रैटेजी फ्रेज्ड एज अ नाउन फ्रेज एंड वन स्ट्रैटेजी फ्रेज्ड एज एन इम्पेरेटिव. आपको तीनों को ही एक ही फॉर्म में देना पड़ेगा. इट वुड बी मोर एक्सेप्टेबल टू से समथिंग लाइक मेन हेडिंग आप दें strategies for developing tooling systems for high speed machining, और फिर आप तीनों strategies जो हैं वो noun phrase के तौर पे दें. यानी आप कहें chemically stable materials, diffusion limited wear regimes आपने जो कि पहले नाउन क्लॉज था, हाउ केमिकली स्टेबल मटेरियल्स आर मेड, इसको आपने नाउन फ्रेज कर दिया, केमिकली स्टेबल मटेरियल्स बना दिया। दूसरा तो आपका नाउन फ्रेज था ही, डिफ्यूजन लिमिटेड वेयर रेजिम्स। और तीसरा जो इम्पेरेटिव था, आइसोलेट द टूल फ्रॉम द वर्क प्लेस, इसको भी आप नाउन फ्रेज बनाएंगे और आप कहेंगे आइसोलेटेड tools from the workplace. Also, you need to avoid choppy sentences. Avoid using too many sentences. That will create a choppy prose or a choppy effect in your prose. Choppy effect का मतलब कि आप हमें पढ़ने वाले को ये लगे कि बार बार आपकी बात कट रही है. Vary your sentence types and combine short related sentences by making some elements dependent clauses or phrases. अगर आपके सेंटेंसेस बहुत शॉर्ट सेंटेंसेस साथ साथ आ रहे हैं तो कुछ सेंटेंसेस को आप कंबाइन कीजिए, कुछ शॉर्ट सेंटेंसेस को डिपेंडेंट क्लॉज कीजिए और कुछ को इंडिपेंडेंट कीजिए ताकि आपके सेंटेंसेस में जो है वो वैरायटी आ सके. कंपेयर द फॉलोइंग चॉपी सेंटेंसेस एंड देयर इम्प्रूव्ड वर्जन. द वीक वर्जन इज ऑन द स्क्रीन इन फ्रंट ऑफ यू. Let's have a look at how this is improved. As you can see, the short sentences have been combined to form slightly longer sentences, and this gives much more cohesion and a much more effective impression of the sentence. Another problem with sentences in English is misplaced modifiers. This means that modifiers are not in the place where they should be. They are at some other place in the sentence. To ensure clarity, place your modifiers clearly. Make sure that your placement of modifiers does not interrupt the sentence structure or create ambiguity. If your modifier is not placed properly, then it can do two things. It can either interrupt the sentence structure or it can create ambiguity, which will mean that the sentence will not be very clear. Placing a modifier between the subject and the verb or between the verb and the direct object can weaken the structure of the sentence and it can make the sentence difficult to interpret. So try not to have your modifier between the subject and the verb. Also try not to have your modifier between the verb and the direct object, क्योंकि इससे ये होगा कि आपके सब्जेक्ट और वर्ब की कंटिन्यूटी टूट जाएगी, या अगर आपके वर्ब और डायरेक्ट ऑब्जेक्ट के दरमियान मॉडिफायर हुआ तो उनका जो कनेक्शन है वो टूट जाएगा और सेंटेंस को इंटरप्रेट करना मुश्किल हो जाएगा. इन जनरल, द लॉन्गर एंड मोर कॉम्प्लिकेटेड द मॉडिफायर, द मोर इट वीकन्स द सेंटेंस. आपका जो भी मॉडिफायर हो उसको कोशिश करें कि वो छोटा हो, क्योंकि अगर लंबा मॉडिफायर होगा, जितना ज़्यादा कॉम्प्लिकेटेड मॉडिफायर होगा उतना आपका सेंटेंस जो है वो समझने में मुश्किल हो जाएगा. जैसे कि हमने पिछले लेक्चर में भी देखा था, हमने स्टैक्ड मॉडिफायर्स देखे थे कि एक ही मॉडिफायर के साथ बहुत सारे और मॉडिफायर्स लगे हों. इसी तरह अगर आपका मॉडिफायर बहुत लंबा होगा तब भी वही इफेक्ट आएगा कि क्लियर नहीं होगा कि वो किस चीज़ को मॉडिफाई कर रहे हैं और इसका मतलब क्या है. Although you can often get away with interrupting the structure of the sentence with a short one-word modifier, adding a longer modifier significantly worsens the sentence. मैंने पहले भी आपको लेक्चर्स में बताया था कि आप सेंटेंस के दरमियान मॉडिफायर इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, लेकिन वो फिर मॉडिफायर छोटा होना चाहिए. अगर बहुत लंबा मॉडिफायर होगा एक सेंटेंस के बीच में तो फिर सेंटेंस का इफेक्ट खराब हो जाएगा. Modifiers of nouns should be placed either immediately before or immediately after the noun. If another phrase is allowed to separate the noun and its modifier, the modifier may be misinterpreted or as applying to a noun in the separating phrase rather than to the original noun. तो इसलिए कोशिश करें कि आपके नाउन और मॉडिफायर के दरमियान कोई और फ्रेज ना आए. जो आपका मॉडिफायर है वो जिस नाउन को वो मॉडिफाई कर रहा है उस नाउन के पास करीब ही वो रहे, क्योंकि अगर बीच में कोई और फ्रेज आ गया तो पढ़ने वाले को ये नहीं पता चलेगा कि जो मॉडिफायर है वो ओरिजिनल नाउन को मॉडिफाई कर रहा है या फ्रेज के अंदर जो नाउन है उसको मॉडिफाई कर रहा है. लेट्स हैव अ लुक एट सम एग्जांपल्स. A weak sentence would be more than 750 metric tons of lead ingots were examined by the quality control inspectors that circle the base of the tower. अब इस सेंटेंस से ये पता नहीं चल रहा कि ingots base of the tower को circle कर रहे हैं या quality control inspectors base of the tower को circle कर रहे हैं. Because when you say that so many ingots were examined by the inspectors that circle the base of the tower, इससे तो impression ये लगता है कि जो inspectors हैं वो टावर की बेस को सर्कल कर रहे थे, जबकि इम्प्रूव्ड वर्जन ये होगा more than 750 metric tons of lead ingots that circle the base of the tower were examined by the quality control inspectors. एक और एग्जाम्पल देखते हैं. For the most part, we considered computer simulations that mimic the lamprey's neural activity only. This sentence suggests that of more than one feature of the lamprey's behavior or more than one kind of activity, the investigation singled out neural activity. Again, possibly true, but that is not what the author wished to communicate. एक और example, the Huron, Egret and Stork colonies in Everglades National Park that once each contained tens of thousands of birds whose bustling extravagance helped inspire the founding in 1905 of the National Association of Audubon Societies, later the National Audubon Society, have shrunk by 95% since the 1930s. Now the improved version would be the bird colonies in Everglades National Park once each contained tens of thousands of birds whose bustling extravagance helped inspire the founding in 1905 of the National Association of Audubon Societies, later the National Audubon Society. Full stop. These colonies of herons, egrets and stork have shrunk by 95% since the 1930s. Similarly, a weak sentence would be where you say, inventors unlocked more than a century ago the secrets of turning the sun's rays into mechanical power. Now, the improved way of saying this sentence would be, inventors unlocked the secrets of turning the sun's rays into mechanical power more than a century ago. Similarly, saying the ability to assemble structures at the atomic scale will require the development of molecular assemblers, tiny programmable robots able to precisely provide positional chemical bonding. The improved version would be the ability to assemble structures at the atomic scale will require the development of molecular assemblers, tiny programmable robots able to provide precise positional chemical bonding. To precisely provide के बजाय हमने उसको to provide precise positional chemical bonding कर दिया, इससे sentence ज़्यादा clear हो गया. Now adverb modifiers, अभी तक तो हमने बात की थी nouns को जब हम modify करते हैं, अब हम adverb modifiers की बात करते हैं. Adverbs should be placed as close as possible to the words or phrases that they modify. Adverbs हमें पता है कि adverbs होते हैं helping words जो किसी ना किसी लफ्ज़ के साथ इस्तेमाल किए जाते हैं उनको additional meaning देने के लिए. They should be placed as close as possible to the words or phrases that they modify. If you allow an adverb to be separated from the word or phrase that it modifies, the interpretation of the adverb may become ambiguous. जिस तरह के हमने बात की, जब हम noun किसी चीज़ को modify करने के लिए लगाते हैं तो उसके करीब तरीन लगाना चाहिए. इसी तरह जब हम adverb भी किसी लफ्ज़ के साथ लगाते हैं तो उसको भी उसके एक पास में ही लगाना चाहिए. Always place a quantity adverb immediately before the word that it modifies. Adverb modifiers का example देखते हैं. For all its richness, today's Everglades is a drastically diminished place. अब drastically का मतलब है to a great extent. Now this is an adverb of quantity and it should be it is, as you see here, placed right before diminished. Be especially careful with the placement of the adverbs only and just. ये दो adverbs ऐसे हैं कि इनको बहुत ख्याल रखना है आपने कि आपने कहाँ लगाया है, इनको कहाँ इस्तेमाल किया, क्योंकि इनका इस्तेमाल से पूरे सेंटेंस का मीनिंग बहुत ज़्यादा चेंज हो सकता है. It can also make the meaning of the sentence ambiguous and change it to a great extent. Let's have a look at some examples where we are using only in different places in the same sentence, and let's see how that movement of that single adverb changes the complete meaning of the sentence. For the most part, we considered only computer simulations that mimic the Lamprey's neural activity. This sentence suggests that of various simulations the investigators might have considered, they focused on just one, just of a certain sort. This is perhaps true, but not what the author wished to communicate. इसी सेंटेंस को देखते हैं जब only किसी और जगह पे लगा हो. For the most part, we considered computer simulations that only mimic the Lamprey's neural activity. This sentence suggests that some computer simulations might do more than mimic. This is nonsense, since all simulations just mimic the process that they are simulating. Similarly, changing the place of only again, for the most part, we considered computer simulations that mimic only the Lamprey's neural activity. This is in fact how the author wrote the sentence. Though out of context, the sentence is still ambiguous. Is the point that the neural activity only of the lamprey but not of other animals was the focus of the investigation, or that only neural activity was to be simulated? जैसे कि आप देखें only की डिफरेंट जगह पे लगा के खासा मीनिंग मुख्तलिफ हो जाता है और खासी एम्बिग्विटी भी आ जाती है, तो इसलिए इसको बहुत एहतियात से इस्तेमाल करें. When we talk of dangling modifiers, अभी तक हमने बात की थी misplaced modifiers की. Now when we talk of dangling modifiers, let's see what we mean by that. A dangling modifier, or a modifier whose connection to the sentence is implied or intended but not actually made explicit, is said to dangle. जब एक modifier है जिसका जो connection है sentence से वो implied है, या लिखने वाले का तो मतलब है कि उस मॉडिफायर का कोई कनेक्शन हो सेंटेंस से, बट उस सेंटेंस को पढ़ने वाले को वो कनेक्शन क्लियर नहीं हो रहा, तो फिर वो मॉडिफायर डैंगलिंग होता है, क्योंकि वो उसके अंदर क्लियरली नजर नहीं आ रहा होता. डैंगलिंग मॉडिफायर्स डिट्रैक्ट फ्रॉम द क्लैरिटी ऑफ योर राइटिंग, दे टेक अवे फ्रॉम द क्लैरिटी ऑफ योर राइटिंग. सो यू शुड मेक श्योर दैट योर मॉडिफायर्स आर प्रॉपर्ली कनेक्टेड टू द वर्ड्स दैट दे मॉडिफाई. टू रिपेयर a dangling modifier, add a noun or phrase that the modifier was intended to modify in the first place and then rephrase the sentence accordingly. जो भी noun या phrase था जिसकी आपकी नियत थी लिखने वाले as a writer, आपकी नियत थी कि ये modifier इस noun या phrase को modify करे, आप उसको clearly, उस noun या phrase को clearly sentence के अंदर इस्तेमाल कीजिए ताकि पढ़ने वाले के लिए आपको पता चले कि आप किस चीज को मॉडिफाई कर रहे हैं. Let's have a look at an example where if the writer says, when traveling at the speed of sound, the moon is approximately 320 hours away. Now this implies that the moon travels at the sound of speed, whereas the moon does not travel at the sound of speed. The improved version would be an object traveling at the speed of sound will reach the moon in approximately 320 hours. क्योंकि when traveling at the sound of speed से ये नहीं पता चल रहा कि what is traveling, क्योंकि जिक्र moon का है तो ये लगता है कि the moon is traveling. Also, try not to use double negatives. In fact, you should never use double negatives in your sentences. Use only one negative word to express a negative idea. In English, if you use two negatives, it makes a positive. Let's consider an example. It would be unacceptable to say, the water management model simulated how water would flow through today's Everglades if all the pumps, gates and other water control devices had not never been built. Now, not never means at some time. तो ये दो negatives मिलके positive हो गए. The acceptable sentence would be, the water management model simulated how water would flow through today's Everglades if all the pumps, gates and other water control devices had never been built. यहाँ not की ज़रूरत नहीं है क्योंकि आप never कह रहे हैं. Another commonly found mistake with sentences is that of faulty comparison, where comparing one item with another can be a very powerful way of describing an object or a process. You need to be sure that what you are comparing is actually comparable with its counterpart. So all the things that are being compared need to be of the same type. To make your comparison effective, you must maintain parallelism in your comparison and include the basis of your comparison and ensure that your comparison is not ambiguous. When you construct a comparison, you must make the two items being compared parallel in structure. हमने पैरेललिज्म की अभी इस लेक्चर के शुरू में भी बात की थी कि जो भी चीज़ें एक सेंटेंस में हों जिनका फंक्शन एक हो उनका स्ट्रक्चर एक हो. इसी तरह जब हम कंपेयर अगर दो चीज़ों को कर रहे हैं तो उनका भी स्ट्रक्चर, जो दो चीज़ें कंपेयर की जा रही हैं उनका भी स्ट्रक्चर जो है वो पैरेलल होना चाहिए. इट वुड बी अनएक्सेप्टेबल टू से इकोलॉजिकल मॉडलिंग, जो कि नाउन फ्रेज है, इज इवन मोर डिफिकल्ट देन टू कंस्ट्रक्ट अ हाइड्रोलॉजिकल मॉडल, जो कि इन्फिनिटिव फ्रेज है. It would be more acceptable to say ecological modeling, जो कि noun phrase है, is even more difficult than hydrological modeling, ये भी noun phrase है. Also, incomplete comparison detract from the clarity of the writing. If your comparisons are not complete, then your writing is not clear. To be complete, a comparison must include both the item being compared and the item with which it is being compared. अगर आप चाहते हैं कि आपका कंपैरिजन मुकम्मल हो तो फिर आप उस आइटम को तो इंक्लूड करेंगे ही जिसको आप कंपेयर कर रहे हैं, लेकिन आपने ये ख्याल रखना है कि वो आइटम भी इंक्लूडेड हो जिसके साथ कंपेयर किया जा रहा है. अगर दोनों आइटम्स इंक्लूडेड नहीं होंगे तो आपका जो कंपैरिजन है वो इनकम्प्लीट होगा. इफ यू लीव आउट द मेन आइटम बीइंग कंपेयर्ड विद, the reader will not understand your intended meaning. For example, it would be unacceptable to say ecological modeling is more difficult. More difficult than what? आपने इस चीज़ की तो वजाहत की ही नहीं है कि किस चीज़ से ज़्यादा मुश्किल है. It would be acceptable to say ecological modeling is more difficult than hydrological modeling. अब यहाँ आप comparison दे रहे हैं दोनों किस्म की modeling का. Similarly, it would be unacceptable to say ever since the early 1960s, when a course of engineers completed the central and southern Florida flood control project, the area's fresh water has been shunted through 1,400 miles of canals and levees, 150 gates and spillways, and 16 of the largest pumping stations. अब ये जो आखिर में कहा the largest pumping stations, largest where? Largest pumping stations in the project, largest pumping stations in the area, largest pumping stations in the world. किस चीज़ से आप कंपेयर करके उनको largest बता रहे हैं? Acceptable version would be ever since the early 1960s, when the Corps of Engineers completed the central and southern Florida flood control project, the area's fresh water has been shunted through 1,400 miles of canals and levees, 150 gates and spillways, and 16 of the largest pumping stations in the world. Similarly, an unacceptable version would be the symposium revealed that more was known than realized. अब यहाँ आप क्या कहना चाह रहे हैं? realized को किस मतलब में इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है? Are you trying to say more was known than was accomplished, or more was known than was thought? realize का accomplish वाला मीनिंग आप ले रहे हैं या realize का thought वाला मीनिंग आप ले रहे हैं? The accepted way would be the symposium revealed that more was known than we realized. Also, von Neumann took a very different approach towards artificial intelligence, AI, than other computer scientists. अब यहाँ, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that his approach towards AI was different from his approach towards other computer scientists? Or are you trying to say that his approach was different from the approach of other computer scientists? आपने ये क्लैरिफाई करना है कि आप किस चीज़ के साथ कंपेयर कर रहे हैं. आप वॉन न्यूमन की अप्रोच जो है वो दूसरे कंप्यूटर साइंटिस्ट की तरफ जो है उससे कंपेयर कर रहे हैं, या उसकी अप्रोच को दूसरे कंप्यूटर साइंटिस्ट की अप्रोच से कंपेयर कर रहे हैं? The acceptable form would be von Neumann took a very different approach towards AI than other computer scientists did. ये पता चलेगा कि दूसरे कंप्यूटर साइंटिस्ट की अप्रोच से आप कंपेयर कर रहे हैं. So this was when we talked about comparisons and how to make sure that the comparisons in your sentences were correct and that you were not missing out on what was being compared with, and also that your comparisons were parallel in structure. Another common error is that of inappropriate shifts when in the tense of the sentence. You need to be consistent in your choice of tense, mood, person and voice. आपकी shifting नहीं होनी चाहिए. Tense में, mood में, person या voice, इन चारों चीज़ों में आपको consistent रहना होगा ताकि आप अच्छे sentences, effective sentences लिख सकें. Shifting any of these categories without good reason will detract from the clarity of your writing again. As a general rule, verb tenses within a sentence or paragraph should be consistent. A shift in tense without reason distorts the sequence of events being described and will confuse your reader. अगर आप खामा में बगैर किसी रीज़न के जो आपका वर्ब है उसको शिफ्ट करेंगे, उसका टेंस शिफ्ट करेंगे, तो फिर आपका जो पढ़ने वाले हैं वो कंफ्यूज हो जाएंगे कि क्या चीज़ पहले हुई, क्या चीज़ बाद में हुई. अगर आप पास्ट टेंस इस्तेमाल करें तो पास्ट टेंस में ही रहिए और बगैर किसी रीज़न के उसको प्रेजेंट टेंस या फ्यूचर टेंस मत कीजिए. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लेट्स हैव अ लुक at a piece of writing where the tenses have shifted. So it says, surgery made critical advances in the 19th century. The discovery of anesthesia by Crawford Long in 1842 and W.T.G. Morton in 1846 gave doctors greater freedom to put their new anatomical knowledge to practical use. After Louis Pasteur discovered that microorganisms caused infections, Joseph Lister, 1827 to 1912, a young Scottish surgeon, realized that antiseptic surgical techniques would allow surgeons to suture wounds and avoid infection. यहाँ तक तो past tense में बात हो रही है. अब देखते हैं कि आगे कैसे tense shift हो गया. Finally, Röntgen reports his discovery of X-rays in 1895, which is immediately put to practical use in surgical diagnosis. अब यहाँ देखें कि ये आखिरी sentence में जो tense है वो प्रेजेंट टेंस हो गया, जबकि अभी तक पास्ट टेंस इस्तेमाल हो रहा था. और यहाँ प्रेजेंट टेंस अप्रोप्रिएट नहीं है क्योंकि जो जिक्र हो रहा है वो भी बातें ऐसी हैं जो पहले हो चुकी हैं, तो इसलिए यहाँ भी पास्ट टेंस ही होना चाहिए था. लेट्स हैव अ लुक एट द इम्प्रूव्ड वर्जन. Apart from being consistent in tense, you also need to be consistent in your choice of mood. A shift in mood without reason will confuse your readers. For example, do not combine an imperative clause with an indicative clause in the same sentence. We're going to have a look at an example which will make this clearer. It would be unacceptable to say, read the instructions carefully, जो कि imperative mood है, and then to continue the sentence in the indicative mood by saying, and you must assemble the equipment completely before beginning the procedure. यहाँ आपने imperative और indicative को combine कर दिया है. Now let's have a look at the acceptable version. It would be better to say, read the instructions carefully and assemble the equipment completely. दोनों imperative में हो गए, दोनों instructions हो गई, order सा हो गया, before beginning the procedure. एक और example देखते हैं जिसमें mood shift किए गए हैं और फिर उसका improved version देखते हैं कि mood कैसे दोनों में एक है. One use for Van Neumann machines proposes a single space seed self-replicating factory that could be sent to another world, where upon landing it will collect raw materials and build more copies of itself to accomplish some enormous engineering project. इसी का acceptable version ज़्यादा जिसमें shift ना हो वो ये है. One use for Van Neumann machines proposes a single space seed self-replicating factory that could be sent to another world, where upon landing it would collect raw materials and build more copies of itself to accomplish some enormous engineering project. जैसे कि आपने देखा यहाँ भी could और would में आपस में parallelism है, जबकि पिछले sentence में could और will में जो mood था वो shift हो रहा था. When you're choosing your tenses, you need to choose the tenses of your verbs accurately to express the timing of the sequence of events that you are describing. Often the particular sequence of events that you are describing will require you to use several different verb phrases or several different verb tenses within a single sentence or paragraph, and then it is absolutely all right to shift your tense because you have a particular reason. अगर तो जो आप चीज़ describe कर रहे हैं वो सीक्वेंस ऑफ इवेंट्स ही इस तरह है कि कुछ चीज़ें पास्ट में हुई, कुछ प्रेजेंट में और कुछ फ्यूचर में, तब तो आप अपने टेंस शिफ्ट्स कर सकते हैं। लेकिन अगर हर चीज़ पास्ट टेंस में हो रही है और आप टेंस शिफ्ट कर रहे हैं तो वो गलत है। अगर आपके पास रीज़न है टेंस शिफ्ट करने का तो फिर आप टेंसेस को शिफ्ट कर सकते हैं। Although it is appropriate to vary your tenses in accordance with the actual timing of the events, you should avoid shifting tenses unnecessarily. Be very clear in your mind that it is actually necessary to shift the tense here. If you cannot see a good reason to shift the tense, then stick to the tense that you have been using. Pay special attention to how you express the sequence of events or the sequence of tenses when you're describing the timing of events or when you're paraphrasing ideas, so that you are not shifting tenses at the wrong place, and so that your tense shifting is not irrelevant. Let's have a look at some examples where tense shifts are used incorrectly. Here it says on the screen, before the development of anesthesia techniques, surgeons would prepare their patients for surgery by getting them drunk. A better version, improved version would be, before the development of anesthesia techniques, surgeons prepared their patients for surgery by getting them drunk. Similarly, at tomorrow's meeting, she will officially announce she will be chosen yesterday to lead the government research project. Now here obviously the tense will be chosen does not match with the word yesterday, which is supposed to be in the past. So it would be acceptable to say, at tomorrow's meeting, she will officially announce she was chosen yesterday to lead the government research project. It would be similarly unacceptable to say, the engineer informed us that she is not able to field test the device yesterday because it is raining. Here the tenses, both the tenses used are in the present, but the sequence of events that is being talked about is in the past. So the tenses are not corresponding with the sequence of events. It would be more acceptable to say, the engineer informed us that she was not able to field test the device yesterday because it was raining. If a previously spoken idea is a general fact that is always true or concerns a future event that has not yet occurred, you can either maintain the original verb tense of the idea or shift them to past tense to match the tense of the verb you used to introduce the idea. अगर आपने जिस चीज़ के बारे में बात की, अगर आप पहले एक आइडिया के बारे में बात कर चुके हैं और वो एक जनरल फैक्ट है, कोई ऐसी चीज़ है जो हमेशा ही सही होती है, या कोई ऐसी चीज़ है जो उस चीज़ का हवाला दे रही है जो कि फ्यूचर में होना है लेकिन अभी हुआ नहीं है, तब आप या तो जो भी आपने टेंस इस्तेमाल किया था वर्ब का उसको मेंटेन कर सकते हैं या उसको पास्ट टेंस में शिफ्ट कर सकते हैं, ताकि आपका जो वर्ब का टेंस है वो ओरिजिनल आइडिया के टेंस से मैच कर जाए. Maintaining the original tense emphasizes the continuing validity of the idea, whereas shifting the verb tense emphasizes the narrative quality of the paraphrase. जैसा कि हम अगली स्लाइड में देखेंगे कि जब ओरिजिनल टेंस रखा गया तो आइडिया की वैलिडिटी कंटिन्यूएशन रही, और जब उसको शिफ्ट किया गया तो नैरेटिव क्वालिटी आ गई पैराफ्रेज की. Now coming to pronoun reference. Pronoun reference refers to the identification of a pronoun with its intended antecedent. जो एक pronoun है वो जिस चीज़ की बात कर रहा है, जिस चीज़ को refer कर रहा है, वो आपस में कितना मैच करते हैं. जो pronoun है वो identify कर सकता है अपने antecedent के साथ या नहीं. इस चीज़ को हम pronoun reference कहते हैं. Two common problems in pronoun reference are unclear pronoun reference and broad pronoun reference. You need to make sure that all your pronouns can be easily identified, because if they are unclear or if they are too broad, then the meaning will be lost. अगर आपके pronouns जो हैं वो clear ना हो कि किस चीज़ की बात कर रहे हैं, या unclear हैं और antecedent से मैच नहीं कर रहे, या इतने broad हैं कि वो एक से ज़्यादा चीज़ को refer कर सकते हैं sentence में या पैराग्राफ में, तो जो मीनिंग है वो इतना साफ पता नहीं चलेगा. You will use a pronoun instead of a noun only if the connection with the intended antecedent is very clear. यानी अगर आप एक प्रोनाउन इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं तो फिर ये ख्याल रखें कि जिस नाउन की जगह आप उस प्रोनाउन को इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं तो पढ़ने वाले को ये पता चले क्लियरली कि किस नाउन का जिक्र हो रहा है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर आप किसी का नाम लेने के बजाय आप ही कह रहे हैं, सलीम का जिक्र आपने करना है और आप ही कह रहे हैं, तो आप ये ध्यान रखें कि जो पढ़ने वाले हैं उनको भी ये पता चले कि आप सलीम का ही जिक्र कर रहे हैं, ना कि किसी और का. Also, make sure that no other nouns with the same gender and number appear between your pronoun and its intended antecedent. अगर आपके प्रोनाउन और एंटीसीडेंट के दरमियान कोई और इस टाइप का नाउन आ रहे हैं जिनका या तो जेंडर वही है या नंबर वही है जिस नाउन्स का आप हवाला दे रहे हैं, तो फिर पढ़ने वाले को ये पता नहीं चलेगा कि किस नाउन की बात हो रही है. तो फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर आप, जिस तरह के मैंने पहले कहा कि आप सलीम का जिक्र कर रहे हैं और आप उसके लिए ही कह रहे हैं, लेकिन अगर आप कह रहे हैं सलीम वेंट टू द मार्केट, ही बॉट एप्पल्स, लेकिन अगर आप सलीम वेंट टू द मार्केट के बाद किसी और भी मर्द का जिक्र आता है और फिर आप कह रहे हैं ही बॉट एप्पल्स, तो फिर क्लियर नहीं होगा. अगर आप कह रहे हैं सलीम वेंट टू द मार्केट, अल्ताफ रोड अ बाइसिकल, ही बॉट एप्पल्स, तो ये नहीं पता चलेगा कि सलीम ने सेब खरीदे या अल्ताफ ने खरीदे. सो यू नीड टू बी क्लियर who it is that the pronoun is referring to. Similarly, with number, if you are using a pronoun along with its antecedent in the same paragraph or even within the same sentence, then make sure that no other noun with the same number appears between those two, because otherwise your pronoun reference will be unclear. Let's have a look at some examples which will make this concept clearer. When a second character arrives at the port before the first character has been unloaded, the port stores the second character in the same register, overwriting it. अब यहाँ आप it का pronoun इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं, लेकिन ये clear नहीं है कि किस चीज को ये it जो है ये किस चीज को refer कर रहा है. A clearer way would be when a second character arrives at the port before the first character has been unloaded, the port stores the second character in the same register as the first one, overwriting the first character. Here we have replaced it by the first character to make it clear that that is what we are referring to. One main problem with the pronoun reference is also that the reference can be too broad. You will use a demonstrative pronoun only if the connection to the intended antecedent of the pronoun is quite strong. Otherwise, your pronoun's reference will be too broad and thus become unclear. Let's have a look at what we mean by this and what we mean when we say demonstrative pronouns. The weak sentence is, the sophisticated computer sound system lets the user input pitch and duration from the MIDI keyboard. This facilitates musical transcription. Now, does the word this refer to the sophisticated computer sound system, or does it refer to letting the user, or does it refer to the inputting of pitch and duration? This जो है ये demonstrative pronoun है, लेकिन ये किस चीज को refer कर रहा है? The improved version would be, sophisticated computer sound systems let the user input pitch and duration from the MIDI keyboard. This direct input facilitates musical transcription. अब इससे ये पता चल रहा है कि ये demonstrative pronoun के साथ direct input का phrase भी हमने लगा दिया, ताकि ये clear हो रहा है कि किस चीज exactly किस चीज की बात हो रही है. Now coming to pronoun case. A pronoun can appear in one of three cases. It can be subjective, in which the pronoun functions as a subject. It can be objective, in which the pronoun functions as an object. And it can be possessive, in which the pronoun functions as a possessor. We're going to have a look at a list which shows the subjective, objective and possessive forms of the personal pronouns. जैसे कि आप देख रहे हैं, subjective pronouns हो गए I, you, he, she, it, we, they, who, whoever, जिसमें जो subject है वो pronoun के तौर पे लिखा जा सकता है. ऑब्जेक्टिव प्रोनाउंस हो गए मी, यू, हिम, हर, इट, अस, देम, होम, whomever. और पोजेसिव जब किसी चीज की पोजेशन की बात की जा रही है तब वो प्रोनाउंस हो गए माई, योर, हिज, हर, इट्स, आवर, देयर, हुज, whose ever. You need to be careful that you use these 3 different types of pronouns in the correct case and that you use them where they are appropriate. Otherwise, you will be writing sentences which are unclear and the reference will not be effective. In this lecture, we have learned how to improve our sentences by improving lack of parallelism, how to improve them by changing choppy sentences into better structured sentences, how to avoid misplaced modifiers which could be either because they are interrupting the sentence structure. Also, we looked at modifiers of nouns and adverb modifiers. We also looked at dangling modifiers and how they can make for unclear sentences. We also looked at how to avoid the use of double negatives, because two negatives or a double negative in a sentence actually leads to a positive meaning. We looked at inappropriate shifts in tense, mood, person and voice, and also we looked at the sequence of tenses and how to make sure that we will actually talk about the tenses at the same time in which they occur. We also looked at pronoun reference and how the incorrect use of pronouns can lead to unclear sentences. We talked of 2 basic reasons why pronouns would be used in a wrong manner. It could either be because of unclear pronoun reference or because of broad pronoun reference, and then we looked at the different pronoun cases, the 3 types of pronoun cases: subjective, objective and possessive, and we talked of how to use those in the appropriate way. With this, we come to the end of our session on reviewing this language of sentences. In the next lecture, we will go down to the micro level and look at words and phrases and how we can employ those better to improve our language in our business and technical communication. Until then, Allah Hafiz.